truth. Oh, I call Alistair Scott.
Mr. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I was going to start by responding to the previous speaker on some of his comments, but I couldn't think of anything to respond to, so there is no need to. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to focus on two themes, really. Productivity, which is a theme through this appropriations bill, and the taxpayer dollar, the value for the taxpayer dollar. First of all, productivity. Productivity needs to be explained, Mr. Speaker. It is where a smaller amount of input is put into a thing to receive the same amount of output, or the same input receives a level of output. That is an increase in productivity, an increase in wealth, an increase in living standard. And I wanted just to clarify that, Mr. Speaker, because the Leader of the Opposition is against the idea of increasing productivity, and I'll explain that in a minute.
Which leader?
Increased productivity can come about by new inventions, like the steam engine, for example. It enabled massive increases in productivity because instead of having labourers weave and spin, we had machines to do it. Telephones were enabled increased productivity because we no longer needed the Pony Express or the pigeons. It put people out of work, Mr. Speaker, but it enabled people's standards of living to rise. Their standard of living, it certainly put the pigeon breeder out of business, it certainly put the horse breeder out of business, but these machines and this increase of productivity enabled people's standard of living to rise. So it was disappointing last month when Xero, the company Xero, a high-tech company, Mr. Speaker, in Wellington, won the top award at the High Tech Awards. It's no mean feat. Xero is part of this age, sir. It's part of the electronic age. These things have put people out of business. These things have put torch makers and battery makers out of business. They've put photography companies, video companies out of business because these things are enabling people to be more productive. So it was disappointing to hear the Leader of the Opposition say last month that this application that Xero was developing, this piece of application that was going to increase people's time, availability, contributing the wealth of all New Zealanders. It was disappointing to hear Mr. Little say that for all its brilliance, accountants would be losing work as a result. And that's exactly the point, sir. That is exactly, who's concerned about having a fewer, less accountants in the economy? And that's what productivity means, sir. And this bill and this budget focuses on increasing productivity. Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to talk about now is the fact that we're using technology more and more to increase productivity. We're having more police time on streets, for example, because they've got access to technology. And that's smart investment. It is smart investment that we need to be put in place by the government in a productive manner. So, Mr. Speaker, what I would like to say is that this economy that we have that is increasing that at 3.5% per annum, this economy that has produced 190,000 new jobs, this economy that has one of the highest participation rates on the planet at just under 70%, this is the economy that enables us to have more hip replacements, better teachers, and more efficient cops on the street. And that's why I'm supporting this appropriation bill, Mr. Speaker. Because this is the 21st century, not the 20th century and not the 19th century, that the Labour parties continue to set themselves in. They've got to get out of that quagmire and think laterally, think innovatively, and think about the taxpayer's dollar in the most productive way.
I'll never do it. Stuart Nash, for the rest of it.
Mr. Speaker, The taxpayer. The taxpayers who is working hard to support his family and community. He and she are also increasing their productivity to increase their wealth and their incomes and their families. So they need us to invest in what we can to increase productivity. And what we do now today, sir, is to focus on the cause of our social problems. Rather than spending our way out of trouble, we're focusing at the bud of the problem, not spending lots of money too late at the bottom of the cliff. So, Mr. Speaker, that is why we're investing in 38,000 single parents have come off the benefit in the last few years. If you think about that from a business proposition, Mr. Speaker, if you can take, and I'm generalising, if you can take a single mum off the benefit and her kids and potentially her grandchildren off the benefit, there's not going to be this recycling, this vicious recycling of beneficiaries. That is going to save the money, that's going to save the taxpayer millions of dollars, increasing the strength of the government's balance sheet. That's just one aspect. And of course, the social aspect is we've got more people in work, participating, setting an example for their children and their grandchildren to contribute to their family's welfare and to the community's welfare. Mr. Speaker, that is the piece that Labor is missing. That is the ground that Labor thought they had, they used to claim that they had. But they can no longer claim that. They can no longer claim that they care for the people at the bottom of the pile. Mr. Speaker, this budget invests in families that are worse off than everyone else. That is part of that $790 million investment in families. Mr. Speaker, can I just, I'll get to the budget and the surplus or lack of the budget, because I think it needs to be addressed in the fact that Grant Robertson and Mr. Cosgrove continue to focus on the swings and roundabouts of what it means to make a surplus or a deficit, whether it's up 100 or down 100, whether it's up 200 or down 200. But they're missing the whole point, Mr. Speaker. The whole point is that we're in the right direction. We're heading in the right direction. And if you want to use the analogy of one's own income, if one was on an $80,000 income and had the prospects of an increase in income on their salary or their wage, whatever it might be, then does it really matter at the end of the year that your bank balance is up 100 or down 100? Does it really matter? Because what really matters is the focus that you're on, and the focus for this government is the future. The focus is not on today, the focus is on tomorrow. So that is what this budget sets up for future generations, sir. These investments today are not just about the people of today, they're about the economy and the well-being of those at the bottom of the pile for the future. So what I say is, to the opposition, don't focus on the surplus or the deficit. It's really just a little swings and roundabouts, as they know. The important thing is the direction, and we're heading in the right direction for the people of New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, productivity is important is a very strong focus of this bill. Taxpayer money and the concern for taxpayer money is a focus for this bill, and the right direction for this country is being set up by this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.